As we were talking about earlier, the collaboration has proven to be pretty fruitful for us over these last 5+ years. As a food scientist, it's very rare to approach problems in a culinary way. More often than not, you're challenged with trying to find out why an ingredient functions a way, trying to create a product to get it through a plant just so that you could ultimately process it. And very rarely are there questions where you'll certainly be worried about flavor and texture and these types of things, but you won't have the same attention to detail, the same attention to the aesthetics of the overall product and ultimately the sensory experience you're trying to design. And as a food scientist, I found that always really novel, and it's really pushed me in a way to think differently about what we're doing when we're creating something new.
And we're trying to also think differently, or at least understand things a little bit more fully. I mean, we've been doing things the way we have been doing them for a long time, but again, not really knowing necessarily why we're doing them the way that we are. And so the ability to get a little bit more of a deeper level of understanding, or to try things for a while and try to figure out how to get somewhere and maybe fail along the way, and then be able to call you and say, hey, we tried these 15 experiments and this is what we've done, and we've learned some things along the way, but we haven't been able to get the exact results that we're looking for. Hey Ted, how can we, can you shift us to the left? Can you shift us to the right? Can you come down and spend a day with us and help us understand some things?
And that is, been fairly refreshing, particularly when I think of both a lab and I think of a kitchen as well. Ultimately, they're places to try things. And I think that, and in my experience working in different kitchens, more often than not, as you mentioned earlier, you do it this way every time, don't ask any questions, just get it done and do it very quickly. What's exciting about working with Wylie is the ability to be in an environment where failure is not necessarily a bad thing, because through failure comes knowledge.
Yeah.
Or at least progress in some way, whether it's in one direction or another. Ultimately, that ability to create an environment where structured failure is part of the process allows for knowledge and learning.
Yeah, I mean, we don't certainly try to fail, but it certainly is a byproduct of much of what we do. But I also think that it's useful for us to work together, because while we aren't scientists, we are in a way conducting our own sorts of experiments, because we do the same thing over and over again, and we are observing the outcome. We can't always understand why maybe the outcome has changed, but I think it's in some ways easy for you to work with us because we are empiricists of sorts.
I would say a chef, and I've thought about this for a long time, a chef is a finely tuned sensory machine. If I really wanted to understand the sensory attributes of anything, I would turn to a chef. If I want to understand, if I have a new car and I want to understand what that experience is when you're sitting in this car, I'd put a chef in there to say, what is the aroma hitting it? What's the texture of the wheel? What is the overall appearance and the colors? Chefs think about these things on a day-to-day basis. Ultimately, they're just these instruments for collecting information. From my perspective,
and we repeat things constantly.
And you repeat things, and you certainly notice the subtle differences between things as well. And as a scientist, it's great to have this type of instrument to fall back on, because you can say, okay, I know this protein or this enzyme will do X, Y, and Z. It seems to be doing it, but what are the other elements there? The function is there, but what are the aesthetic concerns? What are the sensory concerns that we have to pay attention to? Because ultimately, somebody's going to eat this. This is going to be a sensory experience.
Yeah, and we're good at making things taste delicious. That's not necessarily hard for us, but sometimes the little tweaks, the little things, I never paid attention to pH till I started talking to people like you. I never started thinking about how the sugar or the salt or the acid in a system can impact the outcome, the desired outcome. And it's through this dialogue, through this dialectic, that I've begun to understand that we really need to pay close attention to everything we do and try to understand the things that we're doing deeper, so we can make better decisions along the way.
Ultimately, and Wylie and I have talked about this before, the hydrocolloids have synergies. Yeah. You have two different entities come together, and they're stronger together than they are separately. You have agar and locust bean gum together. They create a different and unique texture that's not there. Separately, it's the synergistic environment, and I do believe that culinary and the scientific side of it coming together, ultimately the whole is greater than the sum of parts.
100%. I mean, and again, I think we both get farther sooner when we're working together. And that's the important thing, is that we get to our desired end game faster through this relationship. And it's been such a pleasure.